Labrīt!
Good morning, all the people and participants of the conference present in the audience. Good morning to our remote participants. We are starting the second day of our International Scientific Conference of the time of Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, a unique period in world history. And as we have some newcomers today, I would like to repeat some considerations and statements from yesterday. The conference is dedicated and is incorporated in the process of Kuldīga being enlisted in the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage list. In order to study and research the history of Kuldīga and Kuldīga region in the 17th and 18th century, as you can see, the conference has been transformed as initially the conference was planned in April and was transferred to September, and we are having so-called hybrid conference where some speakers are present in person, some are not, and therefore the conference is slightly technically more complicated, and therefore the present participants in the audience are reminded that for discussion or questions and answers, everybody is invited to use the microphone so that the audio could be transmitted online and so that speakers would be chatted and written questions, and translation can be provided only if the person speaks in the microphone. Conference today will be interpreted into English as well. Questions can be forwarded both remotely by SMS or by email to the conference@gmail.com or writing a comment under the online air transmission of the conference on the internet. Coming back to the agenda today, I know that many were expecting that the first speaker today would be professor, doctor, scholar, patroness of the award of Kuldīga, former president of the Republic of Latvia, but taking into consideration that the conference was switched from April to September, I am honored to read her welcoming speech. Dear participants of the International Scientific Conference at the time of Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, a unique period in world history. In the 16th century, which was quite a turning point in the global history, there was a new state emerged. That was the Duchy of Courland. Despite the fact that it was located between the conflicting superpowers, it managed to exist for more than 2 centuries and turn into a significant player on international political arena. There was developing and progressing the production and manufacture and was a really decent partner. Kuldīga, being located at the crossroads of very significant trade ways, turned into a significant administrative center and the residence of the Duke himself for many decades, and the second capital of the duchy alongside with Jelgava or Mīto. Although Kuldīga lost the status of residence, it still continued to be the significant center, administrative center and trade center or hub where the architecture was developing as well. For the protection of Kuldīga as an administrative and historical center of national significance in Latvia, and to preserve the unique architectonic shape of the town, dating back to the period of the Duchy of Courland in 17th and 18th century, as Almost 3/4 of the plaster masonry in the town has been preserved, dating back to the Duchy of Courland. Kuldīga is still the live evidence shaped of houses and streets, as well as engineering networks, as well as the event waterfall, still is that a living museum and living evidence of the period of the Duchy of Courland. To protect the unique treasures and values of Kuldīga for the next generations, the municipality is striving for being included in the list of UNESCO World Cultural Heritage. With the support of the designated state institutions, the municipality is preparing the application for being included on the list. Upon the recommendation of the Brita Rutenberga, Kuldīga has decided to review the unique value of the urban environment, historical urban environment of Kuldīga in the context of the Duchy of Courland in the 17th and 18th century. I must admit that much progress has been reached, but there are so many subjects as well as topics not studied and researched enough. Therefore, it is really significant for the International Scientific Conference to present and publish the research made by many historians as well as scientists and researchers of other disciplines regarding the value of cultural phenomena and historical phenomena of Kuldīga in the world, and that will become a significant step for the preparation so that Kuldīga could be included on that list. I wish you really all the best in your future endeavors, Professor Dr. Vaira Vīķa Freiberga, ex-President of the Republic of Latvia from 1999 to 2007. Patron of the nomination of Kuldīga for the list of UNESCO. We really extend our gratitude to Her Excellency for the support she provides and will provide for Kuldīga on its way for application process. Now floor is passed to the moderator of the fourth session, Mr. Viesturs Zanders, Deputy Chair in Scientific Research Center for Latvian and Baltic Studies, National Library of Latvia, Professor from the University of Latvia. Good morning. Let us reconvene our work, and without any delay, we can continue our International Scientific Conference, as today will be also very exciting, and we are expecting many very interesting and really full-fledged and comprehensive presentations on various topics. We will have 3 presentations in our fourth session, and speakers are really welcome to follow the time limit of 20-25 minutes, and so that we would have time for questions and answers, both written and oral questions being asked. And now floor is passed to Dr. Historia Marīte Jakovļeva, Senior Researcher, LNA, Latvian State Historical Archive, Institute of Latvian History at the University of Latvia. Welcome. Good morning.
Jāatvainojās, es neesmu iesniegusi tulkiem.
I should apologize. I haven't submitted my lecture to the interpreters, so the interpreting will be on spot. And then if you If I'm too long with my lectures, then please watch to me, because I have so much of materials, and I really want to tell you everything. And I have come to Kuldīga not so long time ago. I haven't systemized everything, and so not everything is put in very logical succession and order. And really, I have so many issues to put under investigation and research, but I will try to do my best. So Kuldīga as a residence and governing center for the Dukes of Courland. I should say that Kuldīga and the city of Kuldīga and its pace of living was determined not only by the daily activities, but also dependence on the activities of the Duchy of the Courland here, and was a Duke is here, or he is absent. And as we know, in 1561, when Duchy of Courland was formed, the spiritual state of Livonia was turned into modern, and with that also the Gottfried Hitler, so together with order ceased to exist, and everything became they became modern people of that time. So Duchy of Courland became secular. So first of all, it was Duke and his court. So everything which institutions which were managing the state and also the people belonging to the court. They all are a governing body of the state. It was financed by the Duke, and the Duchy of Courland, everything what was received, it was not distributed to courts or to Duke's incomes and the state, but the Duke had to cover all expenses related to needs of the state. And actually, that was not a small burden, because noblemen of Courland were freed or exempt of all taxes. They just paid the taxes which they had decided themselves and voluntarily decided to pay. And they paid not as a noble person personally, but he collected from his peasants and then paid to the Duke. Coming back to Courland, as we see, Johann Georg Weygand, the panorama of Kuldīga around 1729, and we see the castle of the Duke when you enter the town, and it is much bigger in size than all other buildings in the town, and it looks like even a church by its height, and it's even maybe bigger than the church. The castle is a place which determines the daily activities and pace of the town as such. And the castle is also the place where all activities related to the management are done. So court decisions are taken there, trials are made there, and it is the most important center of all the lives of the people. Kuldīga, already Duke Gotthard wanted to make this town as the capital of this his activities, and he also wanted to have Vidzeme under his possession, and he wanted to have Riga as his residence, and we know that it was impossible, and Riga together with Vidzeme stayed at the possession of Poles, but Duke Gotthard as the most important towns and castles considered Kuldīga. And in 1561, when he returned from marriage in Königsberg with his wife Anna, Duchess Anna, first of all they came to Kuldīga, And then here we see all the wedding party taking place for local noblemen, for for town citizens, and he is also accompanied by Holstein Duke Magnus and Prussian ambassadors, and it is very interesting that there is a shortage of musicians at that time, and Duke wrote a letter asking to stay for musicians to stay here for some more time because they are missing local musicians here. Duke Gotthard with Duchess Anna stayed outside Kuldīga as well, while children were left in Kuldīga Castle in the court, and it is very interesting letter from 1576 from December, when the person responsible for the children writes to Duke Gotthard that Friedrichs, who is 7 years old at that time, has wrote a letter to his father, while Anna has wrote a letter to Mother Anna. But for the youngest kids, there is a need for new clothing. But children are around 1 year old. So very interesting such nuances which we can find in the letters. And also when starting Gotthard's, at the beginning, Gotthard wanted to have Kuldīga as his main residence, but due to different situations, and he decided to choose Jelgava his main residence. And in Jelgava they had also the graveyard of Cutler's family, and that is actually one of the features of the residence. And as I already mentioned, Jelgava became a capital of burials. I would say that Kuldīga was a place of festive events where they organized marriages and all happy events of the Duke and Duchess. So here we see drawing. Let's take a closer look at the picture. It is 18th century. Kuldīga Castle is in quite poor situation. So we see that walls have broken down, but still there is a roof, and the main building of the castle is still there. Johann Georg Weigand is a very significant person, not only in the history of Kuldīga. He was a doctor, but he is also one of the first persons who made the name of Kuldīga and Courland known in the whole Europe. And we know that historians have heard a lot about Weigand's manuscript about the history of the Duchess of Courland. He had devoted that to Anna, to Duchess Anna, and we also have this material in our archives, the copy of it in our archives, but the original is stored in Peterborough. And as I already mentioned, this manuscript is one of the sources of information for many researchers who are collecting information on Courland at that time. And Weigand also published articles in mass media of that time in Europe. He published stories about catching fish in the air, and different proverbs that Kuldīga is famous with flying fish, and also he made popular different historical events of Duchy of Courland. And I would say that this is one of the persons whom we should remember here in Kuldīga and should make him more popular also today. And here we see a picture Duke Gotthard with Duchess Anna. But of course, residents in Kuldīga Castle, so for this most significant issue is the most important. It is during Wilhelm's time, born in 1574, and his oldest son, he spent childhood here in Kuldīga. Later, mother brought him to Rostock University. He was studying there and visiting mother's relatives. He had many contacts in different noble families and also in courts in Europe. And in 1594, returned to Courland. And the next spring, he signed agreement with older brother Friedrich, where brothers agreed on the execution of testimony of their father. So it was the splitting between Bidzeme and Courland, and they decided how to implement this testimony. And so Wilhelm stays here in Kuldīga, and this becomes his main place of residence. Wilhelm also is traveling a lot around Europe, and in 1609 he gets married with Prussian Duchess Sophia, and in 1610 he brings wife here home to Kuldīga. Here we see Duke's Wilhelm order from 1595, where when he leaves abroad and he leaves orders to his court that once in 3 weeks they have to come to Kuldīga and have to hold trials here. And it is interesting that this document has been retained, and it is addressed to the court of Wilhelm, but it is still, we have the original here, and it is retained in the archives of the town council. And and that is very interesting that to have such an original document. And here we see Sophia, who was born in Prussia in 1582, and she is the mother of the Duke of Courland, Jacob. Yeah. And one of the myths which we have here in Courland, in Kuldīga, it is a story about the Duke Jacob, that he has been baptized in the church in Catherine, but it is not really true. Here we see the letter of the Duke to Henrik Berg, which was sent to his brother, Duke Friedrich, and he also announces that he has a son on the 28th of October, and on the 16th of December, it is planned to have baptizing of the son, and he invites brother with his wife. He invites brother with his wife to this festive event. And we should say that this legend about christening in the Church of Catherine, this comes from manuscript where it is said that Jacob has been baptized already 1 week after the birth, and this fact came actually from the law of Courland churches, because according to those laws, any child of a noble family or a peasant family had to be baptized within 8 days after his or her birth, and it had to be done at church, in the church, not at home. But for the dukes, it was there were different principles. Christening and baptizing and also funeral was event on the state level, and they had to popularize state, and thus different contacts were made during this festival or not so festival, those events. And of course it is impossible within 1 week to invite people to these events and to have them come. And we know that one of the godfathers of Jacob was, it was James Stuart, King of England. And we also have a copy of invitation letter to the king, and also king's answer where he agrees to become godfather of the child and sends his representative, agrees to send his representative to Courland. And it is clear that 16th of December from the 28th of October, it is not enough time for anyways to come to Courland from the whole Europe. Unfortunately, due to the fact that Sophia died on the 24th of November after childbirth, baptizing was moved for 1 week, for actually 10 days, and Jacob was baptized on the 23rd of December, and on 26th December was funeral of his mother. But we have description of the Sophia, of the funeral, of the order, procedure of the funeral, where with the 4 organizers of the wedding, of this funeral, and the succession, how people are moving in this procession, and noblemen, and then it is coffin, and then again Duke Wilhelm, and then all the other envoys, and so on and so far. So all this procedure is described in detail, and also citizens of the town participate. And here it is copy where we see 16th of December, where Duke Friedrich is invited to come to Kuldīga. Here we see Duke Jacob and his wife Louise Charlotte from Brandenburg, and Duke Jacob, when becoming legal heir of the crown, also became legal possessor of Courland, and he was very active in economic activities. He made shipyards in Liepājas, and he moved the shipyard to Ventspils. But in Kuldīga he started improvement of the castle, and in 1645, in September, he planned a wedding with Louise Charlotte. And it was planned as a first festive event and also a marriage ceremony was planned here, because all were marrying abroad, so everything was planned to be organized abroad, but also here. Duke Jacob wanted to have all guests here in Courland, but unfortunately, due to the fact that that there were queens of Danish queen and also Swedish queen, they were widows and they couldn't come to Courland, and for them it would be too difficult. Then the wedding party was organized in Königsberg in 1645 in October, but in Kuldīga, Duke Jacob brought his wife already after this festive event.
Un jāsaka, ka hercogs Jēkabs
I must admit that Duke Jacob also introduced significant changes in the castle, and Kuldīga's castle was documented very well, although the first inventory was written in 1673, which is preserved to nowadays, but the data on the construction work in the castle are found also in earlier documentation and evidence. There was a special manege built in the castle, as Duke Jacob really was passionate for horses, and his subordinates and servants also trained horses. Therefore, there was a manege, and also the stable where 72 horses of the Duke were located, as servants had separate stables. There was also a Bauhaus, but it has gaming arena was also built, but nobody actually knows what games were played or what tournaments took place there, and nobody has any evidence about that Bauhaus. Interestingly enough, regarding Kuldīga Castle, at least the only list I know, the listing and enumerating the paintings in the belonging of the Duke, which decorated the interiors of the Kuldīga Castle. As usually, documents state something like paintings were hanging on the walls and so on, but here we can see the list of paintings which belonged to Duchess Elizabeth Sophie, most probably, and was the list was written in 1776 as the Duke had ordered to take those paintings off and move to secure locked premises for safety. As Dukes of Courland, on one hand, was living in the castle, but they were traveling among their castles quite often, and a part of interiors were taken along. In inventory lists, we can meet such and find such data that Louisa Charlotte has come from Jelgava to Kuldīga and vice versa, taking the leather tapestry with her as well. So when she moved to, for instance, came to Kuldīga Castle, those leather tapestry were put on the walls and then taken off and packed and brought back to Jelgava Castle Palace. We have no data about that, but at the Museum of Tapestry in Kassel we can find such data and evidence, and tapestry have been bought in Livonia, in Duchy of Courland and elsewhere abroad, and were really very bountiful in decorations and patterns and colors, and of those tapestry have been very festive and also very rich in ornamentation. Of course, the list, images and the sceneries or the types of paintings are not very descriptive. For instance, it just stated that it is a painting where a peacock has been depicted, or a tiger dog. And I was thinking what a tiger dog would be. Would it be tiger or not? But it turns out that in late 17th century and early 18th century, that was a kin of dogs being popular at that time. It was a dog, but had the skin and fur was similar to a tiger's one. I can't imagine how that dog would look like, but there was a painting with a girl milking a goat, a naked girl or dressed figure, and there were 36 paintings listed in that list in total. I can mention that Goldingen or Kuldīga Castle was the castle when residents were very festive and happy. Events took place, such weddings and etc. But that was also the administrative residents where the landtags and official meetings took place as well. Unfortunately, we do not have precise data on the occasions of Landtag in Kuldīga, but one of those was organized in 1568 when the Duke was going to enter and join the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In 1569, then in 1599 to 1600, with no particular data about that. Some Landtags have taken place in 17, 16, 22, 27, 37, and so on. Interestingly enough, that Landtag of 1624, when the Duke would have gone to inspect his lands in Semigallia, at least 2 or 3 senior advisors should stay in the castle, in Kuldīga Castle, to accept different types of applications and pleas. Whereas when Duke would have come back from Courland, the advisors should stay in Kuldīga. Of course, the castle had an impact on the layout of the town as well, because garden was adjacent to the Kuldīga Castle, and as far as we have found, there have been apple trees mainly growing and cherry trees growing in that garden in the 17th century. I'm not sure about the years, but in late 17th century, reindeer garden or park was established, as we can see in the painting by Denfer. So that has been the territory of the reindeer park, as we can see. The author has drawn, and the castle garden has been also marked on the map. A reindeer garden was fenced, and I must say that reindeer garden was maintained, especially in 18th century, was quite challenging, as Swedes had not shot all the reindeer, and we have a very interesting letter from the commander of the castle that he has shot 2 reindeers and was forwarded that to the commander in Jelgava. And the commander of Kuldīga Castle reported to the commander of Jelgava Castle that reindeers had turned to be very smart and were hiding quite well, so that no more reindeers were shot, hunted, and harvested later on. Such letters were also sent to the government of Jelgava in 1700, 1709, with the requests of repairing the fence of that reindeer garden, as wolves were entering the reindeer garden and, for instance, in February had hunted 20 reindeers, and that was the damage made to the ducal reindeer garden. The forester was very unhappy. The commander was very unhappy about the forester of that reindeer garden or reindeer park, as he was only drinking around the town and did nothing about the repair of that fence, so that reindeer population for the Duke would be preserved and kept. I haven't found any evidences of the answers provided by the commander of Jelgava Castle back to the commander of Kuldīga Castle. Later on, the fence was damaged totally, reindeers had disappeared, and then that park turned to be very good attracting point for Kuldīga residents to take a stroll or walk around the park, and one of the lessees, tenants of the park, was requesting to fell trees in the former reindeer garden so that fields could be arranged there, and that was the same fate reached the ducal castle park as well. That was a place where people were living who had been Kuldīga residents, but on other hand they were exempted from town fees, Schlossfreiheit, from the castle duties, whereabout other Kuldīga residents were very unhappy, as it was the competition for Bürgerverschönerung, as stated in German language, as according to the town privileges, trade, artisanship, craftsmanship, and other privileged trades could be followed only by the residents who had been granted the rights of castle freedom, whereas other people did the same but did not pay any duties and taxes to the town council. And that dispute between the government of the duchy and the town council really existed for up to the moment when the Duchy of Courland disappeared. Starting from the 18th century, residents of Kuldīga really forwarded their complaints to the Duke. For instance, one Latvian, Jacob, who had already had surname Bērziņš, calling himself. He was making and trading soap, shoes, and so on. But it was prohibited to him and to other Latvians because they didn't have that castle freedom. Apart from that, at the church, the church was common to noblemen and also to Kuldīga residents, and there was no clarity about who would be repairing the Church of Catherine, for instance, whether that would be the Duke or the nobleman of the parish. And then those noblemen considered that they would have really gathered the funds and built a completely new non-German church. One sermon at the church was held also in Latvian, opposite to the fact that a sermon should last at least 2 hours, and that usually was very prolonged, and Germans were waiting for their sermon, and that was usually delayed. Therefore, they were quite complaining about that and could not do their trade on a Saturday as usual. Patron rights on the poor people house for Germans was financed by the Duke, whereas this poor people house for residents of the town was financed by the town council. And so we can say that symbiosis on one hand, but on the other hand that was competition between the duchy and the town and residents of the town. So the right of the duchy, the separation of powers were not clear to the duchy, to noblemen, and to Kuldīga residents. Therefore, that dispute or some disagreements always have existed. And that was situation with the Duchy of Courland in Kuldīga in 17th and 18th century. Thank you.
Paldies, Marītei Jakoļevai.
Thanks to Marita Yakovleva, who really is the leading researcher on the issues of Courland, and she knows very much, and she not only offers us different stories or myths, but also offers us very scenic views of that time. Do we have questions? Thank you very much for so interesting lecture. And I have two questions. You mentioned that dukes were traveling and they took with them different objects. I have a question. Is it documented that they took also books with them? Or about the gifts? Are there any documents proving that there were gifts used? The noblemen from other countries making gifts to the Duke and Duchess or anything like that? So are there such documents? Or with regard to books, I haven't seen any such documents, but about the gifts, yes, there are documented gifts to dukes and Duke and Duchess, and also their gifts to other noblemen and to other reigning houses. It is a quite huge topic, and we can it is a topic of a separate speech or even a conference. Could you name at least some objects which have been made as a gift? Usually it is some cup or some graal or something, or also or 1645 it was present as a barrel from as a wedding present, and it is still can be found, and it is from Courland objects. We have not found many of the objects, but about things which have been presented, or not really things. These are gifts. It is horses, dogs, and hawks and puppies, such live beings. So, anybody else? Also, I would like to thank you for so interesting story. I have a very strange question, very specific actually. So, Duchess of Courland. So, industrial state, I would say. So, 75 manufacturers, and it was. Also, some specific objects they were producing for hunting, and it was a very interesting lock for it. So, do you have any idea about such any information about this hunting device or tool? It is difficult to answer to say, but I know that in Kandava there have been several specialists or masters, craftsmen, who were really good craftsmen that have done and made these objects, but nothing more. I haven't found anything specific in documents. About the number of manufacturers, you should be very careful. We have this feeling that it is a number of so many manufacturers, but it was so that one was established and then it ceased to exist, and it is now. So you should not exaggerate with the figures, actually. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for a very interesting lecture. I have 3 questions. So one is very narrow, and then it is next is wider and very wide. So it's a very simple question. When Landtag comes, noblemen, where did they stay when Landtag was organized in the town? Another about people living in citizens of the town. Do we know the number of citizens in Kuldīga during Dutch times of Courland? In Riga it increased mechanically, or how was it with Kuldīga? Do we know the number, and can it be examined? And the third question, which is very wide, what do you think if maybe we need one bulky, big research on the Courland. Also, maybe we need one big publication for people to read. And if we are not able to do it on the scope of the whole Duchy of Courland, or maybe we can make such a on Kuldīga, or maybe we should translate the research on noblemen of Courland from German. Somewhere they have made such research for 100 years approximately. Maybe Latvians also could read this when it is translated. So, should we make translations of the books for people to know the history of Courland and Kuldīga, or should we make our own research? So, of course, we have many small articles, and people, if they want to know something, they read these separate articles, but we need a concentrated, nice history of the whole Courland. I will start with the third question. Of course, we would need such, but of course we have human resources, we have financial resources, and you know about the system which we have here. We have publication such and publication such, and it is enough with one line to get. So you can write something in foreign language and you get financing, but you can write many pages in Latvian and you do not get anything. So I think that we have to translate anything that relates to the history of Latvia. That should be translated into Latvian. So Poles have written many documents in France. Anne Sommerlath, which I actually mentioned, and also. It was, we had some problems with that publishing house in France, which they wanted much money, and the editing house Zinātne is still in the process. So we face different problems regarding translating these documents into Latvian, but of course it would be very nice to have these, yes. About the number of citizens of the town, the different figures mentioned, they are number of houses, of households. In 1635, we have 4 districts, and the district, then it is one the master of the district, and it has been 144 living houses and 2 empty places. But then the question is how they counted these buildings, or should it be people just in the main building, or it was also the other surrounding smaller buildings, and this, and then the number of spirits. Of souls, or are these just men, or including children, or is it also those having the freedoms of the castle, or it is approximate figure. About the increase of the number, then actually I cannot say whether it is birth or mechanic increase of the number, but it is the fact that Kuldīga suffered different natural and other disasters, especially epidemics and fires, and Kuldīga was burned to earth within 2 hours. There's 40 buildings destroyed, and fire is quite common at that time. Yes, well, if we speak about these landtags, we should say so that the noblemen owned quite many buildings here, houses, and always there have been conflicts between parties, between noblemen and also citizens, so asking about the jurisdiction of those people who are living in these houses. Can it be a trial of these people living in the nobleman's house, and also about fees to be paid and duties to be paid? But Kuldīga stands out thought among other Courland towns that starting from the second part of 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, Kuldīga is a place where noblemen of people come in autumns and winters, and they really came in big numbers, and then they have different parties and balls, and the Schlippenbachs also mentions that he has participated in mask party with 400 carriages and every 2 weeks it had been some theater performance and concert, and really festive events have been many here, and this started already at the time of the Duchy. But where Landtag people were living during that Landtag time around the town, I think. And it was also very interesting to mention that Landtags of the Duchy is one thing, but from 1691 to 1709, there's several Piltene Landtags also held, and this is also interesting because Kuldīga is not in Piltene territory, but while castle was here in good orders, and Piltene Landtags were held in Kuldīga. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? It is one request, not really a question. Taking into account that I know how many people were waiting for Marīta's lecture, I would like to ask to comment one thing. Marīta, some years ago, also made a lecture telling us about different myths about Kuldīga, and just some minutes, some myths which were demissed, and also audience has changed during these years. It is just very interesting. One myth was already mentioned about the baptizing of the Duke, and something else. Could you mention what you remember? The main myth was, of course, about the shipyard in Kuldīga, which is unrealistic due to the river and to and Duke Jacob established it in Liepāja and later moved it to Ventspils. The fact that iron manufacture was established by Duke Jacob, that is not true. It was done by Friedrich Casimir, his son. And anything else, I think not so much myths than addition to everything. Johann Georg Weigand, in his manuscript, counts ships which have been drawn on the ceiling of the big hall, and he says it is, and even lists in names. And then in all manuscripts and in all books, there is a number of the fleet of the ships of the Duke. But when you read in 1619 the stock list of 1699, it turns out that these ships have been painted not only in the main hall of the castle, but also in apartments of the Duke, of the Duchess, and different other rooms. Also in one room, it had been also the globe on the ceiling. But unfortunately, it never says that it is without names. And then the question is, where from Weigand has taken this information, or how he combined or merged this, because there is a list of ships, yes, but it never says that they have been depicted on the ceiling of the ceiling. So it could be that we could say that both these facts were merged and made public. And something small. So it is. We know that in Kuldīga we have cultural potatoes being grown, and they have been harvested already, and we have discussed this, and people have questions about potatoes and Duke Jacob. Could you comment on potatoes and Duke Jacob? Well, it is not really precisely known when potato was imported. That is unknown. What we can find in Mirbach's book and where this information comes, that I also do not know. But So in the 17th century already, in the court of Duke Jacob, we hear read about potatoes. We don't know whether they were grown, but he really knew about potatoes. He had stayed in France, in the Netherlands, and they already were using potatoes. In at the end of the 17th century, it was mentioned that potatoes are grown also in the garden of Duchess in Jelgava. And around that time also the first cooking books with different potato food recipes, and it could be also in the possession of the Duchess of Courland. So yes, potatoes were known, but of course not among peasants. It was not used for food, and at that time it was only at the big end of the 18th century, not so early as 17th century. Thank you very much.
Nākamā priekšlasījuma temats ir liecības par Kurzemes.
The next presentation is dedicated to the evidence of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia in the architecture and town planning of Kuldīga by Dr. Jana Jakobson, head of the building authority of the Kuldīga regional government, chair of the executive board, ICOMOS Latvia. And Inta Jansona, architect, building authority of the Kuldīga regional government, PhD student from the University of Latvia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to see everybody present here. Colleagues, in terms of interest taken and passion taken for the specific historical period. And we would be telling about evidence of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia in the architecture and town planning of Kuldīga. The previous research carried out by the historians and professors by outlining of the history of the Duchy of Courland in the history of Latvia, but when it was clear that such a detailed research would be needed for Kuldīga regional government to file that application, we were planning and carried out very comprehensive and detailed. For that, we would like to thank our colleagues from the Building Authority for that really enormous contribution of the attribution of the evidence of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia in the architecture and town planning of Kuldīga, including Venta waterfall. And I would like to present the conclusions of that research as well as a further development of the town. The paper was researched aimed at studying and researching town maps, drawings, paintings, as well as other geographical historical evidence. Mainly we have used the first map, which to our opinion is the basic and fundamental material for knowledge-based research of the change of scenery, skyline, layout of the town, sceneries, drawings of Venta waterfall, and further other drawings and paintings dating back to the period of the Duchy of Courland. Having studied the materials on Kuldīga town in the period of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia, we have studied many evidence and documents as well as maps, interiors, drawings and paintings. Documental materials or documentary materials are enough for assessing the evidence of the Duchy of Courland in the architecture of town planning. In the map you can see the evidence which are preserved and kept of the Duchy of Courland and are depicted in pink color on our map in the plan layout of the 1797. As mentioned by the previous speakers, the situation layout is slightly different, but of course the map looks different as well. Regarding methodology of research used, we have mapped in detail various elements of urban environment. For instance, the street layout and the water body direction, which was kept up to 18th century. The map shows various streets of categories, crossings across River Venta. In late 18th century, of the motorway or the carriageway established in late 18th century already. There have been also cross streets and perpendicular streets or ways or paths which have been turned into streets. Currently, this street currently is a pedestrian street, but of course in the times of the Kuldīga Castle that was also a carriageway as well. In the picture you can see Kalna Street, which was prolonged up to Baznīcas Street alongside with Alexis River, which was separating and isolating the castle part where the former and ancient Kuldīga Castle was built and was located. Although the cover of and pavement of the streets have not been preserved, the land or the soil or uncovered carriageway and street is considered to be quite okay for the streets or for the paths outside the town. Streets have more new pavement and cover made, but you can see that in urban environment the nature of the urban environment is not changed much, and where the asphalt which was covered and installed in a Soviet period, we can see and we consider that it should be that historically relevant cover of the street should be replaced back and restored. We can see the squares depicted in a light blue color. Places or plazas have been allocated or have been established at the strategically important places in the town. For instance, at the church, at the town council, at Rathaus and our town council square and market square have been preserved in the unique and original shape as they had been established in the period of the Duchy of Courland. In early 18th century up to nowadays, this square is donated and presented to the Kuldīga residents and visitors, and it is not a parking place anymore, and that historical shape has been restored. With the town expanding, the initially named streets after and according to the direction where to that street had led has not been preserved. All of the main streets depicted on the map of the 18th century have been preserved and are still existent, and almost half of the squares of the town have kept their initially planned purpose and purpose of the use. Regarding the spatial mapping, the same analysis have been carried out. For instance, Alexis River. Alexis River crosses the town of Kuldīga and was quite architectonic and constructive element of the town, dividing it in several parts, and it was established or connected with the water mill located on the branch river of River Venta, falling into Venta River after the waterfall. The different type and width of bridges, in total 11 bridges have been installed and erected throughout the times, and original bridge constructions and structures have been preserved in some cases. So this is the ensemble of buildings on the Alexis River, showing the sequence and consequence of the traditions kept and preserved in the historical part of the town. Of course, Venta waterfall have been depicted and drawn in all the drawings and paintings and visit cards and cards drawn and depicted in the 17th and 18th century. The river at that time was more of economic and household needs, and quite often was depicted with fisher baskets placed near the Venta river waterfall, and also for other different economic purposes. We have the former castle park and garden with some remains of the previous landscape when the castle existed. Regarding the layout and structure of the town, according to the old plan, so we had water body of the town, River Venta, Alexis River, as well as scenery and landscape elements with terrain, graveyards, and a bank of the river. We have two water bodies, almost more than one half of initially existing water bodies are still existent nowadays within the territory of Kuldīga town, and the bridges across Alexis River have been preserved at the same number. We would like to thank Professor Brita Rudolph for the methodology she recommended, as well studying the buildings, houses and other elements of the urban environment. We have a cartograph of facades of the buildings and houses in Kuldīga town, with the most prominent examples of that period we have studied. Until 1797, the preservation degree of the buildings and houses built before 1797 have been preserved, and we are keeping to the date of that. Construction volume of the houses or buildings built before the late 18th century, if that has been preserved the same, those buildings and houses were included in the analysis. We have 18 houses or buildings with the characteristic or typical construction volume, structures, layouts, fittings, and also different elements of the construction, including the characteristic roofing structure, as well as beams used in the construction, as well as foundations, walls, roof, and historically relevant window covers, as well as the wind beam of the roof construction made of wood. And then we have another category of the constructions and structures, building structures, preserved until the late 18th century, according to configuration of initial plans in the basement, which was later on replaced with plaster work. Proportions, facades, and the elements and finishing materials characteristic of the period we have studied. The next category marked was the location of those houses or buildings built. For instance, 13 Police Street. Visually, total image of the building or house built before late 18th century. The other group would be sequence or heritage of the building tradition preserved and met the total image of the house located on the Pilsoņu Street 14, two-slope or four-slope roofing structure warehouse, where we do not have any data or information about the warehouses on the initial map dating back to 1797. Evidence in nature were collected, identified, and analysed. We have Jelgava Street 13. The most characteristic and typical elements, which is the Saint Trinity Church in Kuldīga, were in architectonic elements and decoration in the interior are quite simplistic, but are relevant to the existing architectonic solutions for 1776, with original elements also preserved. Interior of dwelling houses have several elements preserved from that reported period. For instance, at 17 Baznica Street, we have the window arch incorporated and embedded, as well as some patterns for dating back to 1797, where from 3/4 of the houses were built in mid-18th century, and architectural image really still evidences the characteristic elements of the Duchy of Courland period. In total, the houses being preserved and existing still from the construction tradition followed by the Duchy of Courland really create the visual image and evidence of the town at that specific period. Now we can see the map with water bodies, streets and houses located in the town. But of course, another issue is how we are analyzing the town spatially. What are the sceneries and sceneries of the town from different directions, coming, for instance, from Jelgava, from other towns of that period, and what the sceneries and spatial environment looked like. Based on the historical images, for instance, that the St. Catherine's Church was the vertical dominant in the town skyline, or the crossing across the Venta waterfall, and so on. So you can see the historical images which were used under the methodology recommended by the professor, as well as archaeological polygons for archaeological research on the Police Street, where the first marketplace have been placed and located, where we have discovered some ancient proofs as of the coins dating back to the mid-17th century, as well as the archaeological studies and prospecting on the former streets, with fragmentary work done on the former marketplaces. We have studied for archaeological purposes the pavement, the interiors of the inner quarters, carriageways, as well as other evidence characteristic of the Duchy of Courland. Regarding the surroundings of the town, it is really important that both the center of the town carriageways, as well as the houses and sceneries and landmarks located outside the town would have been studied. For instance, directions of carriageways or streets leading to different directions dating back to the 1798, by summing up and compiling and analyzing the map dating back to 1797, that the main streets and main crossings of the streets and ways depicted in that initial map are really coinciding with the existing layout of the street, and Kuldīga and the streets of Kuldīga have really preserved the streets and direction for communication between Kuldīga and Ventspils. Regarding the household or secondary forms, where we have chronologically younger and newer buildings dating back to the late and mid-18th century, form Martinsala, which is now located in the territory of the town and is artificially separated by a dike for passing by the Venta waterfall. ways, forest stands, cemeteries, household buildings throughout the time and period of the Duchy of Courland are really showing the direction to other towns, and more than a half of the secondary buildings as well as farms have preserved the initial names, as well as separate forest stands correspond with the situation depicted in the initial map. And my colleague will tell what happened with the material up to nowadays.
Es savu stāstījumu
Hello, I will start my story by offering to you everything from the very beginnings of the town and what can be dated back to 12th century. And at that time the town didn't exist, but of course it is a settlement. In that settlement on the hill or hill village, it is an oval type fortification. And in the 13th century, the Livonian order castle is being built, and this is considered to be the foundation date of the town. But both these territories are autonomous, they are independent of each other, and until the 14th century, the town is expanding quite rapidly, but it consists of 4 autonomous parts of the town, and these are just the first, the second, the territory of the castle, and also Livonian order part, which is the central part, and also on the north part of the town, there is one part of the on the north side of the part of the settlement. These are the 4 districts which form the beginnings of the town. Also, these 4 only in the 16th, 17th century, these all parts are merged with one legal system in one economic unit. And I would like to mention also the fact that in 1561, while it is the date of establishing the duchy, so it is actually a very precise date. And at the time we see that the main axis of the town is the main street of the town. It is a marketplace, and also there are these other streets, adjacent streets, and in the 17th century, it is the new city square is being built, taking into account the fact that the town is expanding, and the previous one is too small. It is a new center formed for the town, and it also facilitated the development of the neighboring districts. The first is a Catholic district, where Catholic Churchill receives land for building a church, and also the properties around that place. And thus the community of Catholics is made. And in the north part of the town, so Jewish people come to the town and settle here, and this part of the town is developed. In this time, the structure of the town already has two squares, and also the street which is connecting these 2 squares. 18th century should be considered the time for rapid expanding of the town. It is strengthening of economic activities between different towns, and also streets and roads are developing in the direction of these towns, and mainly buildings are on the front of these roads. And this town has this asterisk form. And 18th century, now many changes. Mostly it is density of the buildings. At the second part of the century, slightly bigger houses are being built. Streets stays the same. Only when planning bridges towards Riga direction, only some streets are changed, and they change direction, combining and connecting the 2 different streets, and also the crossing over Alexis River becomes of secondary importance. And then also the new street, which is right now Skolas Street, that is made across the Alexis Street. But by developing industry, these connection places become very important. And about buildings, in the beginning of 19th century, mostly this is one-story buildings, quite similar along the streets, in the yards. They are supplemented with different additional structures, different volumes inside, but in the center the buildings are more representable, but in the yards it is very simple and everything is quite similar. With regard to 20th century is a dual century, and at the beginning of the century city, it is still this system of two parks, two squares, and the main street, but at the same time also Liepāja Street takes significance. There's also Liepāja Street now. And at the beginning of the century, it is planned that this historic center is too narrow for the traffic, and there's plans about a new marketplace, which is now Pilsēta Square, and it is really made, and it is quite modern for that time. And it is equipped for the needs of the market, and at the same time it is also planned as the economic center of the town. But at the same time, a little bit more about the buildings. The beginning of the 20th century, of course, the intensity of buildings increase, industry is developing, number of citizens increase, mostly rent houses are being built. On the first floor it is a public function, sales trading place or shop is planned. On second floor is more for residents for living. Also public and administrative buildings are being built. About peripheral buildings, we see dominating first one-floor buildings, traditional shape, mostly for workers. Shapes are very laconic and very simple, but at the same time we see that this really supplements the different elements of the construction. It is really with interesting details. Second part of 20th century, that is mostly marked by Soviet times, beginning of Soviet times, and during World War II, this town didn't suffer so much, but these two dark spots you see as empty places also now. This was ruined during the war. It is a park of 1905, so the place where Jewish community lived. This is now improved, and it is really a green place of the town. It is a park. And the second one is where we have part from different districts disappeared, so it is rather impossible to renew these places, because streets are crossing this place, and it is a modern crossing already there, but still there is possibility to improve this zone and to improve this, also to retain historic value and to retain this tradition. Of course, with time, different industrial objects have come to the town. The largest is factory Vulcans, which is not existent anymore, but the rest of the buildings, they are not so active in industry, but they retain that character. So it is craftsmen, people, So could you pass to conclusions? Yes, and quickly and shortly about conclusions about the development of the town. So street network has been formed starting from 12th century, merging and uniting different parts of the town, starting from 12th to 14th century. So Baznīca Street or Church Street has retained its importance until the 20th century. On the 20th century, it is supplemented by Liepāja Street, leading to in that direction. And 20th century makes characteristic changes to this town, because it is higher buildings, and they are built instead of previous buildings, and it is quite successful supplementing of the existing structures. And due to war activities, the historic center has not suffered a lot, so we have quite many retaining buildings, and also protection status and a lack of resources has helped the town to maintain these historical buildings. And it is very easy to read that every development has been merged with the previous structures. And development plan and succession of these you can see very well in all structures and buildings of the. So also in the plans of 20th century, I will show this. So it was planned to have different parks around and to have also place for building and Piltene Street development, and this development was both implemented in modern times, but still these zones are continued to be used as they were at the very beginning. And historical center of the town has retained its administrative significance, and at the same time we also have the function of the business and also residential functions. So it is social economic activities of the town, and also residents are still here not only in the morning and evening hours, but during the whole day and all the days of the week. So it is, and by summarizing all these issues, historical, scientific, scenic and cultural witnesses, we have made such local and international heritage territory. So you see this essence, the nutshell of all this, and this violet color. This is the protection area, which and this map serves us as a material for managing all these historic certificates in our daily life. How we are administering these cultural historical values? Mostly we perform different research activities, scientific and cultural, different investigations. So we try to make normative regulations for local regulations. Also, we try to maintain a balanced town environment. So we have different guidelines for organizing this environment. And here you see also the cover for parks and for streets, meeting the historic aspects of the town. So the street coverage is not asphalt, but complying with the historical materials, and at the same time the policy of the town management is that all these important functions should be developed, and they should be developed in the historic city center. So town should not be emptied of people, so it should be retained. And a very good example of this is about sports complex development here locally and in the center, and also about the involvement of society. We really believe that local community are those who use this our heritage, and we do a lot to inform people about the values of the town, about specific features, and not only on the local value scale, but also on international scale. And we do a lot to explain the proper methods and solutions for renovation of buildings. We provide different methodic materials to tell how we organize these renovations and what to do. So also very practical issues involving our citizens in maintaining historical buildings, renovation of these buildings, just through practice to understand the material use, also the significance of these materials, to retain the historical buildings in their shape. And with time, local municipality has participated in the different grant systems, and then we can also attract different specialists of the sphere and restoration specialists with best examples of in the field. And in 2 minutes, when answering the question whether in modern times we have some features and some witnesses, evidences from Courland's times, from the Duchy of Courland, and is it enough to represent us in the world? So we have, from those times, we have quite many of these elements which allow us to feel that epoch, to see the buildings, the volume of the buildings, and that you saw also in my presentation, on the map on the screen. And when we evaluate the scenery and the structures, we see that mostly we have retained the Duchy of Courland. So we have retained many buildings, we have panoramic scenery, also the scale, the character, also special elements, some elements, and also we feel the influence of the Duchy in the planning of the town, in the architecture of the town, and especially if we analyze this with the plan of the Kuldīga town from the times of the Duchy. The town has been developed through times, also maintaining this fundamental features of that time. And in general, Kurzem Semigallia Duchy, through the 200 years, it is very, very important for cultural heritage of the whole world and in Europe. And in Historical Center, we see a very bulky present of the evidences from this time. Thank you for your attention. And this is just very short when retelling these examples of our historic witnesses. Do we have any questions? So maybe formulated, not formulated, maybe ideas? Very short. Do you have, or to what extent do you have construction permits from Kuldīga, and how fragmented is that heritage? Construction plans, construction permits just for specific objects, for bigger buildings, but not from the times of Duchy. That is just the first plan which we see, and separate drawings. Those are from later times, from 19th century, beginning of 20th century. So then we have construction plans. As far as I know, we do not have such witnesses of that time, just the plans. Maybe Daiga or Zanda knows anything more, but no, we haven't found such documents. Do you have any other question? Written or maybe later we have.
Bet ja varētu tā ļoti...
Man vēl...
So I have one more question. I couldn't manage, so Ilga Trenche-Huntinger, and I have a question about bridges. In this presentation, so we couldn't see the development of bridges so well and the history of bridges, because from time to time the bridge existed also in times of Duchess. It was connection to Riga, to Prussia, so from Riga to via Kuldīga to Prussia. So could you tell a little bit about the bridge? What happened with the bridges in that time? This research, so we try to base on known sources, and we do not have enough knowledge on the bridge across the Vanta River. At that time, and therefore we didn't emphasize this. Maybe Daiga and Zanda knows anything more, but we have agreed so far that the material about the bridge and the existence of the bridge, it is just fragmented in written form. We do not have any other evidences, so we have not analyzed. Daiga, Zanda, could you comment about this? But yes, but maybe, so we have a question here. Maybe it is possible to think about it and come back to that issue afterwards. So thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation.
On the last presentation in our fourth session today coincides with the format of the conference itself, remote sensing of the Kuldīga Castle, contemporary methods in practical architectonic research by Master of Architecture, Artūrs Lapiņš, architect, so Doctor to be, arhitektoniskās izpētes grupa, company. While speaker is approaching, so please do not hesitate if you have any questions, so please write them down or send them in writing. We'll have all the speakers on our panel at the end of the session, and we will end our discussion part as well. As we have heard from the previous presentation, architectural prospects as well as sensing was carried out on the evidence of the Duchy of Courland and Semigallia and term upstanding archaeology. So the archaeological evidence which is searched for in upstand archaeology if compared or contrasted to the underground. And I would like to tell about that in the context in the case of the Kuldīga Castle. There's only a small part of the top part of the castle remains have still be preserved and found, as if the Kuldīga Castle was devastated and destructed during the northern wars. The construction supplies of the remains of the castle were used by the residents of Kuldīga, and instead of the castle remains of the town, park and garden were established and erected. As we can see, as we have seen in the previous presentation, by compiling the current and previous research and carrying out the low terrain upstand architectural and archaeological research, we were able to identify the eventually recoverable or discoverable elements of the underground structures, and by compiling historical data as well, it is possible to reconstruct in theory the image and the volume of the Kuldīga Castle by using modern virtual visualization methods. The history of the Kuldīga Castle has been carried out for several times, and one of the first, the local researcher Wilfried Fraunholt Trey, 1886 to 1961 was carrying out that research based on the contrastive analysis of historical images of the castle, his research and investigations in nature and separate archaeological prospects he has prepared in 1934 and supplemented the first and currently the only reconstruction of the image of the Kuldīga Castle for the first time, depicting the situation as of 1680. Here, that research really evidenced the deep knowledge as well as deep plunge of the author and interest about the history of the castle and the study of the fragments partially seen from the underground in the first third of the 20th century, and especially seen from the coast, from the bank of river Venta. In nature, the research and study and archaeological investigation of the castle began in early 20th century. According to the incentive of the Kuldīga regional government and order, the several research and investigations have been carried out in 2002, as the historical research and investigation, as well archaeological and geophysical, archaeological and aerospatial investigation of the location of former castle was carried out. In 2016, of the lists of inventory of the Kuldīga contour of 1342 were published and translated in 2014. Archaeological fixation was continued in the course of the archaeological supervision of the restoration of the streets adjacent to the former place of the castle by fixing and recording separate fragments of the fortification and the foundation of the castle found underground. By comparing and contrasting the historical data and images with the terrain of that specific land plot and the conclusions of the previous research, it is possible to make spatial contrast or compilation and sensing of a 3D model of a former Kuldīga castle. Historical images of the Kuldīga castle depict that as a process of destruction in drawing dating back to the late 18th century shows a part of interior castle, inner castle, being preserved, and the external wall, north and east wall, with the north gate tower in the significant amount still preserved. Gradually, the images show the destruction and remains of the castle in the beginning of the 19th century, and the scenery of River Venta as of 1830 shows only the remains of the castle only. And schematically, designation of the location of the castle we can translate as and interpret as the castle square, Schlossplatz, and is shown in the oldest plan of Kuldīga dating back to 1797. And the Schlossplatz, or the castle square, is partially measured and partially reconstructed by the drawing published by the Bernhard Schmidt. We can see the upstand and terrain or underground images or 3D modeling of the former place, and we can see and compare the heights or skyline of that castle by contrasting or comparing it to the height of average height of trees, and therefore we really identified the physical location of former Kuldīga castle. According to the data of archaeological investigation and sensing, we can see the image by a colleague. The walls and terrain, of course, shows the north direction of the tower and of the gate, which will allow us investigating archaeological evidence in more detail. One of the oldest aerospatial sensing in under different weather conditions, which was used in Great Britain, Poland, as well as with experience gained in Latvia. In April, after the snow melt in spring period, we have tried a pilot project for aerospatial investigation in 2002. In early spring, we were hoping to define the soil marks or the signs or features of different humidity in the soil. And in May, we hoped and expected to see the signs or features of growing and sprouting grass shot. Although, as the report concluded, due to the overgrown territory and area of the castle place, none of the described features we did not find and identify either of the features we expected to see, and therefore different differences or extraordinary conditions could have been reported and fixed, but unfortunately such a systematic fixation in different light spectra have not been carried out. Therefore, most prominent results on the objects or elements located underground were identified by using so-called land radar, and geophysical investigation of the remains of the Kuldīga Castle was carried out by engineer Georgijs Sichos in 2002, and the cartograph on the right depicts the investigation carried out, potential location of walls, fortifications and underground communications. There is also there have been potentially an underground passage, secret passage, leading to the north outside of the castle, which might be also purposed for the Duke or for some escape if needed. So, by combining the geophysical investigation and schematic model of the surface of potential location of the Kuldīga Castle was modeled, and we can contrast or compile it with the existing situation and the buildings located on the territory of the former castle of Kuldīga, and location and direction of the streets currently existing in the town. Then it is possible to overlap with the data from special modeling of the existing situation, leading and resulting in the further places to be investigated for more precise model, 3D model, to be implemented. And when that 3D model will be ready, we will be able to study it and to compare with the historical images at our disposal and our possession. So, comparing and contrasting it with the terrain according to the drawing of Fromhold Tray reconstruction as of 1680, and if compared to the historical image, we could contrast or overlap the model with the historical image and to see how the model looks like and whether it corresponds to the historical images of a partly destructed or devastated castle with the ducal castle located in the very middle. And it is possible to precise the model by means of the reconstruction, where we can see the location of the towers alongside the perimeter of the castle and with the terrain, existing terrain and former terrain and scenery, if compared to the height of the skyline of the town itself. And now we'll have a short video. Remote sensing of Kuldīga Castle. Drawing by Weber. Drawing by Schroeder of 1809 with the remains of the castle. Min kokle. from Beltray of 1934, reconstruction of the castle. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. Although there are only rare evidence of the volume of the castle, which was devastated and disappeared in at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, and based on the historical data and the upstart archaeological investigation, creation of the digital model of the castle will provide theoretical reconstruction of the volume of the Kuldīga Order castle, and the location of the castle still preserves the several terrain elements, providing only a fragmentary and incomplete and incomprehensive image or impression about the former construction of the plaster, as well as the fortification, and the well thought and targeted explanation of the existing fragments at our disposal would improve the integration of the location of the castle into the urban environment of Kuldīga town, and would provide the grounds and justification for the further investigation. Any questions to the speaker? So the audience is so impressed. No, not so impressed as not to ask the question. Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. Yesterday we have discussed about that, and I would like to ask. I have seen 3D modeling in France, in Burgundy, with the larger building have been existed more larger construction volume than the Vatican. So could it be the same method or samples used from France? So that, and could you share how where your inspiration comes from? So well-thought reconstructions and 3D modeling have been used in many places around the world. So in Vilnius there is one castle which is reconstructed by discovering, opening up the foundations, and that a castle was actually reconstructed virtually, similar to the Blackhead's house in Riga, where the foundations were opened, but actually the information found and evidence found in the foundations only cannot provide the full picture and image of the sometimes existent building. This is an opportunity. Sensing is an opportunity to see what we cannot actually see, but we could imagine that. So we have houses, person comes to a town or to a place, the more he or she knows, the more information will be, that information if that will be a 3D model, at least, of the Kuldīga Castle, visitors and tourists will have an opportunity to see, at least virtually, how the town could have looked like when the castle still existed, and this enhanced reality could be provided. And these are really methods, and this is what we can do about the location of the Kuldīga Castle. For a better navigation and impression about the town. Thank you. This is really tangible model as the town developed alongside with the castle. I have 3 questions actually. What is our famous castle cellar? Underground basement? Or the second question is, what would be the territory of the investigation, or most probably the underground archaeological discoveries, openings, and would not be recommended at that location? Could you use light scenery to the castle. Of course, that should be introduced. I will start answering from in the opposite direction. Yes, of course. It is clear that we will not be constructing a duplicate or replica of the castle again, but that enhanced reality or 3D modeling and adding another layer of cultural and architectonic layer to the existing situation, so that at least this 3D model would be an opportunity to imagine that castle being there again. So projections, visual projections, holograms and so on, there are very many different methods how that 3D model can be integrated into our scenery of Kuldīga town. And that story of the castle would be told. I have mentioned the investigation or research methods having studied the directions of the research and study about the location of the castle, as the archaeologist Juris Jurkans did, for fixing and recording those anomalies. If we cannot see something by eye, we can use equipment and tools. So human eye sees some contrast, but devices regarding the differences or deviations from the norm can be sensed by special devices and equipment which we can use for investigation. Of course, that technology exists. In CESIS, there is an Investigation and Research Institute which uses such methods already. Secondly, archaeological investigation open or underground is not possible, but in this castle there are really targeted research and study in specific sites or points where from not only information and data about the structure and construction of the castle is received and obtained, but also about plantation, about vegetation, characteristic of that place. And that is very comprehensive and a very multifaceted study of the archaeological soil and terrain, as well as vegetation and all the conditions which could have impact and influence on the underground fragments and remains underground. The terrain and the place of the castle really evidence about the galleries that have existed and had been built in the complex or ensemble of the castle. And what about old idea of Kuldīga residents that everything should be exposed by archaeological investigation to have a glass roof or glass construction above, so that could be really showed about the Duchy of Courland. I think that Kuldīga, what we have seen yesterday and today, and we'll see, glass would not fit the historical and archaeological image and soul of the town. So Kuldīga is beautiful enough. It is actually perfect, and we cannot add something, something like a foreign body on that. I understand that we have one short question. I have a question about the legend. There are many legends about underground passages. Under the river went a waterfall to St. Catherine Church. I know that there are suspicious basements on Courland Street, where is the Ark arc-type ceiling in the basement, and there are evidence about some passages. Are these legends true? So data about the passage underground we can really see according to the spatial remote sensing. So on the slide on the map you could see that straight line. And why there is an arch in basement as Kuldīga. There are many different water bodies and small rivers, or that might be some underground canal or channel, which was really characteristic of that time. If that has been passage, then we could have imagined why, for what purpose such passage would be built. If I understand correctly, that these could have been a part of drainage system, and these are passages for cleaning those, or for blowing or flowing. So all the water comes into the upper river in Kuldīga town, and so, for instance, if there is a small river or some spring and a house is built, then later on above that, so that river or that spring could really damage the foundations, and therefore such channels or canals were built. Thank you. Thank you all the speakers for their presentations and for participants of the audience. And our remote participants, we could also thank Mr. Zanters for moderating this session. Thank you so much, but I didn't do anything about that. And now we announce the coffee break, and we will reconvene at 12 o'clock sharp. Thank you so much.